Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn, and today's episode we're talking about the Los Angeles Chargers backfield battle based on data. So, stay tuned until the end of the video where I reveal who is going to be the winner of this backfield. But what we're going to take a look at is we're going to look at the production, athleticism, and other data of the current backs on the Chargers to kind of determine who's going to be the top guy this year. Now, the setup. The Chargers hired Jim Harbaugh. Jim Harbaugh, um, whether he was in the NFL or college football, he's had an above average rushing offense. Harbaugh then hired Greg Roman. Roman's average rank as offensive coordinator in terms of rushing attempts is 3.8 out of 32 teams. So he's always had a top five team in terms of rushing attempts in his career as a coordinator, regardless of Harbaugh being there. And then because they did link up a little bit when they were in when Harbaugh was in San Francisco, and the Chargers also have the best offensive line based on data in the NFL. In addition to drafting one of the best offensive tackles this year in Joe Alt. So everything about this Chargers team screams running the football, rushing attack, all those kinds of things. So because of that, whoever is going to be the top dog here in terms of rushing the football is going to be fantastic. He's going to get all the opportunities. He's going to get the majority of the carries. There's a lot of stuff to like about this setup, okay, from a fantasy perspective. Now, Harbaugh and Roman tendencies. Both Harbaugh and Roman typically utilize a variety of running backs in their schemes. So, when you go to San Francisco, you go to the Bills, you go to the Ravens. In terms of Greg Roman, he's going to have a variety of running backs. It's not just going to be one back that gets, 75 to 90% of the carries on the team. But there is going to be one guy who stands out amongst the rest in terms of data. So one example, Frank Gore, of course, when in San Francisco. When Roman was in Buffalo, it was LaShawn McCoy. In Baltimore, the consistent threat was Lamar Jackson, though. They did have a brief moment with like Mark Ingram, but it was very choppy after Mark Ingram kind of left the fold, and likely due to injuries and no one back really coming to the forefront. And a lot of the backs that are on the team right now are in that similar situation. So fast forward to now, the Chargers have signed two backs in particular, Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, who both have familiarity in Greg Roman's scheme. So both of these players have played in that system. They know it. And because of that, they're going to have a little bit of an advantage on the rookies and, of course, the players that are there that are remnants of the past. Now, they also drafted a rookie running back in Kimani Vidal, who is a bit of a mystery box asset. He's probably the most exciting prospect that's been kind of floating around fantasy circles because they kind of everybody loves fifth, sixth round running backs, especially when there isn't an established starter, which is kind of the situation. But this is a little bit more murky than those other situations. We're going to get to that in this video, but there's a little bit more chaos involved here than a lot of people expect. And then, of course, the Chargers also have a pass backfield running mate in Isaiah Spiller, who is also on this roster that could challenge for some reps as well. There are a lot of different outcomes to consider here, but the focus of today will be who you should invest in long term. So long term, for dynasty purposes, who should you invest in? Let's start with pre-draft profiles. So looking at the pre-draft profiles of the team on the roster right now, because a lot of times what a player did pre-draft can kind of inform you what their upside is at the NFL level in terms of like ultimate upside. Okay, and when you start with the first player here in J.K. Dobbins, he does have some interesting production traits here. 78 percentile in terms of his total offensive market share production, 59 percentile in terms of receiving, and then 65 percentile in terms of touchdowns. When you look at the starter averages, he was a little bit in that similar vein for starter averages, but not really near the Pro Bowl averages, in terms of his production. When you look at his efficiency scores, he was fantastic. He was one of the most efficient running backs, probably out of all the running backs that we're about to talk about today at Ohio State. Then when you look at athleticism traits, he didn't really do a full amount of athleticism because he wasn't healthy during the pre-draft process, which again is something that continually gets said about him, is he's also not healthy. So again, he's always had the injury bug in terms of, as soon as the pre-draft process started, he wasn't fully healthy. And then, of course, when he goes to the NFL, he's not fully healthy during most of his career. So again, he's that type of player that kind of like Mr. Glass is kind of the label on him right now. Now he had a 93 percentile speed score based on his projected 40, which is pretty good. Then we look at his adjusted production traits. He was fantastic. So again, out of all the running backs we're about to talk about today, J.K. Dobbins, has the best pre-draft profile out of all of them. It's just that injuries have really hurt his ability to stay on the football field and really be established as a starter. He's currently the top back on the team right now. He could be the top back going forward, but again, you would have to make sure he's healthy to kind of get those stuff out of him. So, usually when you have players that are what I like to call old maids. So old maids are popcorn kernels that haven't popped. Whenever you pop popcorn, in a bag and you got all them kernels in there that didn't pop. That's kind of what J.K. Dobbins is to a certain extent. He's one of them kernels that ain't popped yet, and as much as you try to like repop it, it just doesn't turn out the way you want it to turn out if it had popped initially. So that's kind of the issue that you have there with him. Now, in terms of Gus Edwards, on the other hand, his production coming out of Rutgers was pretty much above average across the board, but wasn't really starter level. When you look at his efficiency scores, his efficiency wasn't that great at all. Then, of course, you look at athleticism traits. He did have above average athleticism. And then when you look at his adjusted production traits, they weren't really there. So he was a much older prospect. The production wasn't really there. And his efficiency scores also weren't there for him. When you get to Vidal, positives about him, he does have good total offensive market share and good touchdown market share, but not that best in terms of receiving yardage. Efficiency-wise, he's pretty decent in terms of efficiency, not amazing in terms of TD percentage, but really good in terms of yards per touch and yards per reception. When you get to athleticism traits, he is the most athletic running back in this particular offense. So that is going to be a big factor to kind of consider in terms of investment. Are you going to invest in players that are athletic a little bit and also kind of fail to pop, or are you going to invest in somebody who's new, who does have some warts here and there, which we're going to get to, but is really athletic? Then, of course, we get to his adjusted production traits, where his age kind of drops him a little bit. His level of competition drops him a little bit because he played at Troy, so his production traits would be great for a prospect from the Big Ten, but he's not from the Big Ten. He put all this production up at Troy, so he is a player that was productive at Troy, but he wasn't elite at Troy, and that's going to be a question mark for him. Even though he did test amazing as an athlete, I don't think his athleticism always showed up on film for him, which is a bit of a question mark for him. So that's something else to kind of consider with him. Then, of course, you get to the last running back to kind of talk about pre-draft profile wise, and Isaiah Spiller. Taking a look at his production traits, it's actually kind of similar to J.K. Dobbins. When you look at his efficiency scores, he was very efficient in terms of his yards per touch and yards per reception. With TD percentage, not so much. When you look at his athleticism traits, he had really good flexibility testing, but below average speed and below average explosiveness. And of course, adjusted production, he probably is second to J.K. Dobbins in terms of the best pre-draft profile from a adjusted production standpoint, which takes a look at strength of schedule, strength of team, age, and those other sort of factors. Taking a look at the NFL production. So let's leave the pre-draft, okay? Leave the pre-draft and go to how they actually performed in the NFL. And truthfully, the best running back out of this group in terms of NFL production has been Gus Edwards. When you look at his macro production, his running back macro score, he's pretty much has been above the rest in terms of Dobbins and Isaiah Spiller. In terms of that, he also has been better in terms of efficiency. So Edwards has done really well in terms of being a pretty efficient running back as well in his career as a rusher. Again, he's not amazing, but he's better than these guys in terms of their career. And then, of course, if you get to the receiving aspect of things, Edwards has also shown up a lot more as a receiver. So Edwards has kind of been an 80 percentile player in terms of his rushing ability and 60 percentile in terms of his receiving ability at the NFL level, whereas Dobbins and Isaiah Spiller have kind of failed to connect the dots with those kinds of production traits. So from just an NFL production standpoint, if you're just going to base it on past performance, Edwards would be the guy. J.K. Dobbins, has shown some success here and there, but he hasn't really been able to kind of keep it all together and really be um, fully there in terms of production. A lot of that's because of injury. So that's kind of what you're looking at here from that perspective. Now, lastly, before we get to the end in terms of overall outlook, you look at the athleticism traits. I think this is the biggest thing in terms of investment that you really need to consider here, which is in terms of the athleticism of J.K. Dobbins, Isaiah Spiller, and Gus Edwards. Kamani Vidal has that in spades, and for that reason, I think that's why I would really consider Vidal to be kind of like the Isaiah Pacheco of the Chargers. So Pacheco was another player that had inconsistent production coming out of Rutgers. Of course, Vidal's at Troy. And again, both of those players, production wise, were not the best. But what they did have was really great athleticism traits. So, from that perspective, in terms of age, in terms of those other sort of factors, Vidal might be the move to have if you really are thinking about that investment there. Okay. Now, overall outlook. Okay, I think the future of the Chargers backfield has three options. Okay, the first option is the chaos of a backfield committee where Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, and Kamani Vidal get mutual love, leading to inconsistent statistics across the board. So this is definitely a possibility. Edwards and Dobbins have familiarity with this scheme. The rookie from Vidal has strong athleticism traits, but the production is not exactly where you want it to be. And because of that, you kind of have some concerns there. Secondly, I think the second option outlook, I think that most people are kind of buying into is that Vidal emerges as the number one option, with Gus Edwards getting duties as a third down receiving back option. Because the biggest thing that Edwards has on Vidal is his receiving ability is better than him. When you look at his ability at the NFL level, he's been the better receiving back out of all the backs that are on here in terms of proven receiving ability. And Vidal at the college level hasn't really shown to be the best receiving option there. So, Vidal is very athletic. I mean, he could really excel as a receiver, but it's something that hasn't really shown up in terms of his production. And because of that, that's going to be a question mark there. But I think the second option to really consider here is that Vidal does end up becoming the main starter because of his athleticism traits, which kind of push him to the front. And again, the other backs that are there are used goods to a certain extent, unfortunately. Now, the third option, of course, and this is another, option to kind of consider, is a future Chargers running back is not on the roster right now, and could be found in free agency or the draft in 2025. So that's another thing to kind of consider is when you look at all the running backs that are here. I know they have to go with somebody. They have to go to the dance with somebody, and that somebody may not be there right now. They may just do again the number one option right there, and kind of stay with that, or they would do the third option, which is try to find another running back in free agency, try to find another running back in the draft next year. And this year is kind of a wash. It's kind of an inconsistent year, or disappointing year, I should say, and from that perspective. So the ultimate conclusion as a data analyst looking at the numbers is that the Chargers are a volatile situation that honestly I might avoid until more clarity is found. Most of the backs on the Chargers are what I said before, old maids. They're players who took too long to pop on the tail end of their careers in the NFL, and that's why so many people want to go with Vidal because he's a new thing. He's exciting. It's like a mystery box. Like you don't really know what you got yet, because he hasn't really been in the NFL yet till now. But based on his pre-draft profile, it's not the strongest. He doesn't have the strongest pre-draft profile ever. I do like the athleticism traits. That is an option of something that could happen, but the backs that are there have the familiarity with the system. So each of them could easily be viable options here. So because of that, it's just too volatile of a situation. I can't completely write off J.K. Dobbins because of what he's been able to do at the NFL level. I can't completely write off Gus Edwards either because he's been the most consistent out of all the running backs here at the NFL in terms of his play. So you kind of have to stake your claim here a little bit. You kind of have to go out on a limb. And again, me personally, I probably would go with Vidal. If I end up losing on that situation, I think it is what it is. But I think the upside is there with him. But I think he could be sort of like a Doug Martin as well. So I don't know, you guys, if you remember Doug Martin, but he was a player that was really athletic out of Boise State. Yeah, similar situation. He was much more productive than Vidal coming out, but that could be a similar situation here where the most athletic running back ends up winning out overall. He's the youngest, he's the most athletic. He ends up taking the crown because of that. But we'll just have to wait and see. But that's kind of my feelings on this situation. I think there's a lot of positives, but I think we do need to wait and see, pump the brakes a little bit. Don't draft him too high because there is a lot of volatility here. It's not like um, Aaron Jones situation on the Packers. It's not like I'm trying to think back on some of the other running backs I kind of pushed to the forefront. It's not like those situations. All these backs have shown to be efficient runners, and because of that, you can't just write them off right away. So that's going to be the biggest concern going forward for this backfield, and is again, it's too volatile. It's too many things could happen. I can't really just go, oh, get Vidal, because I think there are some other options that could happen here. So overall, thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Jim Coburn. You can check out my other work at patreon.com/jcoburn. Also check out my X, formerly known as Twitter account at Geometrics. And I'll see you guys in the next episode. Peace.